I would like to introduce to our viewers Go Against the Tide, Mr. Kurt Hyde, which is specialist in matters of elections, and he's a writer of New American Magazine. You would like to say something about elections to polls, which are very important. So please do that.
Well, actually, how about if we start with what the paper trail movement is and how I got started in that. Would that be a good start?
Yeah.
Okay. I was teaching computer science at a college as an adjunct faculty member back in the 1980s, and I led my students in a study of what was the latest emerging technology in voting equipment, which was a paperless computerized voting machine. And that's when I advocated for a paper trail. I got to speak in Boston at a symposium, and until somebody comes up with a date earlier than August the 14th, 1986 for a public advocacy for a paper trail in the voting equipment, until someone comes up with a date earlier than that, I'm going to claim I'm the original, and it does not look like anyone's going to come forward now with that. So, but the paper trail, how about if I explain what that is? The idea of a paper trail is, people usually call it a voter verified paper trail, meaning that the voter gets to verify his or her vote on paper in something that can be recounted, because you really can't tell for sure when you just look at a computer screen, because it's relatively easy to have something on the screen but put something else in the database. So that is, and there are also, there are two basic ways to have a paper trail. One is by having what's known as an optical scan ballot, and that is one where the voter marks it on the piece of paper, and the paper is then fed into a computer that is prepared to read it. The other kind is where you can vote with a piece of electronic equipment that produces a paper record of what you voted, so that the voter can also check that to be sure that it's right. And then that can be recounted in case there's any suspicion that anything has gone wrong with the computerized aspect of it. So that would be what a paper trail is. Now, I hope that wasn't too long an explanation.
No, yes, it would be useful. So, what is the other method to false, to check the elections?
Okay, yes, because the paper trail itself is good, but it's not the only thing. And this is something that can be of a concern. First thing is, a paper trail itself is no good unless there is a way to actually do those recounts, and to also make sure that that there are proper controls of the people with those paper ballots that come out of it. But there are many other things as well, such as you need to make sure that no one is modifying the totals, because the totals, if they're on a computer, they can be modified. And the way that this was done in traditional American elections, long before anybody even dreamed of a computer for anything like this, was that the votes had to be counted immediately after the polls closed, and the results had to be proclaimed publicly and written down on a piece of paper and posted at the precinct. And that's also important because there are suspicions sometimes, whether they're well-founded or not. They are still suspicions, but suspicions that, that perhaps someone is adjusting the totals. So.
And you have some investigations about the German elections during the Hitler's time. Could you show us some incomes of these investigations?
Okay, well, yes, I wrote an article for the New American a couple of years ago, and it was called Dictators Dictating Elections. But there's an example of where there was a paper trail, but the other problems were there. Certain things that they did under, and there's even a book out called Voting for Hitler and Stalin, and that's a very good book. I know it's available in German and in English. But one of the things that the Nazis did, of course, was they did intimidation. They intimidated the voters. Another thing that the Nazis did was they controlled what was on the ballot.
Oh, yeah.
And sometimes they would run ballot questions.
One party?
Oh, yes, that's another thing, too. Yes, they had one election where in fact, they had one election, this is actually humorous. They had one of their elections, and this is in the magazine article, where all they allowed was just the Nazi candidates.
We know. I think that my youth years in communist Poland, there is always one party, and they forced us to go to elections, but there was only one choice.
Now, however, the reason why this gets humorous, the Nazi one, is when the Nazis had that election where they had only the one party, would you care to guess what percentage of the votes the Nazis got?
Oh, I don't know.
They only got about, I think it was 90 or 91%. It's in the magazine article. Because the people deliberately spoiled their ballots.
Oh, yeah.
And it was in the newspaper in the United States, in the New York Times, when they described that as how could people have made those mistakes on the easiest of ballots.
So as I know, the German journalists in this time have not mentioned about these matters.
Yeah, well, now that's one of my favorite jokes. Maybe not a joke, I should perhaps say it differently, but I love to quiz people on this, and I ask, what is the best language to know, to speak, to read, to be fluent in a language? What language is the best language for investigating Nazi vote frauds?
I know the answer because we have talked before a little, so maybe you will tell our viewers your answer.
In my opinion, English. And the reason is because of all of the American reporters who were over in Germany during the time that Hitler was using elections to solidify his power in his country. And the German journalists couldn't. The newspapers would be shut down if they printed anything negative about the Nazis. The German people would get into trouble. They'd be taken to a concentration camp, perhaps, if they criticized the Nazis. So really, that's the reason why it was the American newspapers that I have found have had some of the best documenting of the Nazi election frauds. In fact, I was just looking at them today. And one I have is from the Dallas Morning News, and it was on the front page of the Dallas Morning News at one of their elections. And on it, right on the front page, one of the paragraphs says, and actually they talk about the election results, and they say, but actually the results were known before the election was held because someone had broken into the Ministry of Propaganda office and had stolen the election results that were
before voting.
Before the voting, the results were already there.
Oh yes, we are joking, but it's a very sad thing about this totalitarian governments and tyranny. And as you mentioned about this Hitler times, today's European Union, especially Germany, is very similar in the media market, because when these illegal immigrants which came to Germany make a lot of crimes during the celebration of New Year, I think 2 or 3 years ago, for a few days, none of German newspapers announced about these cases. So I think that we are close to the same kind of terror as in the Nazi times.
Well, I hope not.
I
We
hope too.
not. But we can hope. But one of the things that I would also like to say is that if you want to take a look at your elections, you also have to watch out for the voter registration lists. Do you have voter registration lists in
Yes.
Poland? So you want to look at your voter registration lists. When people show up to vote, do they sign a document saying that they showed up to vote?
Yes.
Okay, so those signatures are in their hand. Those are good. When they sign in, do they sign in on a piece of paper or do they sign in on
A
electronic?
list. No, on paper.
Okay, and is that what is known as a consecutive sign-in sheet? That is, that as everybody, like if you
Yes.
sign in, then I will sign in
They
right
will
after
give
yours.
you the voting card after you sign on the list your name.
Yes. So if I show up right after you, will my name be signed right after yours on that list of people who signed in?
No.
You have alphabetic one.
Alphabetic list. There is alphabetic list. You are going
Okay.
with an identification card, a passport or something on, and they look for you on the list, and you check it by,
Okay, so
by
you
signature.
right. So you sign it in there. That is actually not quite as secure as the consecutive sign-in sheet.
Oh, please talk more about it.
Okay, the Texas had the consecutive sign-in sheet where you had to sign in, and in 1948 we had a Senate election that was stolen,
Oh, yeah.
and it was everybody knew it. What has happened is that since then there has actually been a confession. There's been a confession on it. So, but that was in 1948 in Texas, where we had Lyndon Johnson had lost by 113 votes, and he was there at a meeting with Luis Salas, the election judge, and also political bosses, other political people, and Lyndon Johnson gave the order, find the votes. And they had found that in precinct 13 in Jim Wells County, that that the total for the votes for Lyndon Johnson started with a 7. It was 700 and something. So they said, let's change that 7 to a 9. That will add 200 votes. That will change the 113 vote loss to an 87 vote win. That's when he got the nickname Landslide Lyndon. Well, but it then required 200 more signatures. And because it was on a consecutive type sign-in sheet, people said part of the proof that this was fraud was because the 200 voters all signed in alphabetic order
Yeah.
and with the same blue pen.
Oh.
So, and that is why the consecutive sign-in sheet is better, because if someone is going to stuff the ballot box, then that's how that piece of evidence showed up. It still is good that they're signing in and that. Regarding your elections now, is it okay for someone to walk in at the election and just walk in and just take a look and see if things are running okay?
No, only some representative of parties can do that. And they count votes after the election.
Okay. It's good if they can actually get in, but one of the security features of traditional American elections was that it was illegal to forbid the public
yeah.
from coming in. You didn't have to make an application ahead of time. One of the problems with only allowing certain people who have applied to come in is that sometimes you can pick and choose who you want to call your representatives of somebody, and if you're and if you're cheating, you'll make sure to call for a crooked representative. but still, so I was just going to say the best thing is to the American elections at one time, and of course we have all different states, but it was, as far as I know, it was universal in every state for at least a while back in the 1800s and the early 1900s. It was absolutely legal for anybody to walk in at any point. The only thing you weren't allowed to look at was to watch the individual voter marking his secret ballot. But they had to count the votes as soon as they closed the polls. They also had to proclaim the results immediately, so that then there'd be, that's how you keep it from being altered fraudulently, is because now you've made it in front of everybody while everybody can watch. So.
Thank you for your thoughts about the elections. I think it would be useful to our viewers. And I would like at the end ask you about the Poland and Polish delegation. Have you met Poles before, and what do you think about Poland and Polish people?
Oh, I have met Polish people before too, of course, but I just love the people who have been here, you and your people who've been with you. This has been just wonderfully rewarding. It's been just wonderful to meet you people and talk to you people, and I just love you.
Thank you for interview, for being with us. Był z nami pan Kurt Hyde. Dziękuję wam bardzo i pozdrawiam z Appleton. Do zobaczenia.